Hey everybody, it's Mr. Mazzoro, and today we're going to move on from talking about what is soil and what makes it up to the things in it and what they do for plants. Not the components of them, but the actual nutrients or the things that make it more acidic or more basic. We're going to start by talking about the layers of soil in nature, how soil basically is distributed in a forest or underneath your house. And then we're going to start talking about things that you can add to soil to make it more acidic or more basic. Or if it's too acidic, neutral, or too basic, neutral. And we can talk about fertilizer and what is in fertilizer and what those different nutrients do for plants. So first, we're going to talk about the 4 layers of soil. If you were to take a cross-section of the earth and the very, very top of earth, the Earth's crust, this is what it would look like. On the very, very top would be the top layer of soil. That's called surface litter. Dead plant material on the surface that's rotting, and as it's rotting away, adding organic matter to the soil. Directly below surface litter, there's a layer called topsoil. Topsoil is the top foot of soil. By definition, because of the surface litter on top of it, it's the one that is most rich in nutrients, has the most organic matter in it, and it's the one where most plant roots are. Most plant roots, even the largest trees, actually are only in this top foot of soil because it's really the only part that has any nutritive value at all. Below topsoil, there's subsoil. Subsoil contains larger rocks, not as many nutrients, and not as much air, and as a result, there's not a lot going on in the subsoil. Below the subsoil, there's the parent material, otherwise known as bedrock. This is a solid layer of rock or boulders that's actively being degraded, broken down into subsoil, which is being turned into topsoil, which is being nutrified using surface litter. This rock is called parent material because the bedrock, which is under all the soil in the world, that bedrock is the original place that soil came from. That's the original rock that started breaking down to become soil. Next, we're going to start talking about things you can do to soil to change it. And one of the things you can change about the soil is how acidic and basic it is. Soil pH will change. Soil will naturally fluctuate from more acidic to more basic just in nature. And it does that because the minerals in soils decompose and soil organisms breathing add carbon dioxide to the soil, and that makes it more acidic. And different things the same way make it more basic as well. The problem is, as soil becomes too acidic or too basic, plants become malnourished and begin to die. The reason is because if you look at all the nutrients in soil, the more acidic soil is, or the more basic soil is, the less of those nutrients is available on a whole to plants. So the thinner this line is, the less nutrients would be available to the plant. So you could say acidic soil below 6.5 and basic soil above 7.5. That's where these bars are the thinnest, and that's where soil nutrients therefore would be the least. If you follow that logic, neutral soil, soil that is a pH between 6.5 and 7.5, has the most concentration, the highest concentration of nutrients in it, and therefore it's the best for most plants. However, some plants do prefer more acidic soil, and we'll just quickly go through these. Begonias prefer acidic soil. Berries prefer acidic soil. Gardenias prefer acidic soil. Hollies and evergreens. If you were growing any of these, and some other plants as well, you would actually want your soil to be less than 6.5. You would actually want your soil to be very acidic. The opposite is true too. Some plants prefer basic soil. There's carnations, cactuses, baby's breath, what's around roses, lilacs, and boxwoods. These are the Edward Scissorhand bushes that you carve into mazes or carve into actual dinosaurs and stuff like that. All of these plants prefer basic soil, so you would actually want the soil pH to be above 7.5 in these cases. And you could stop and pause and write these down in your notes, but I'm going to move on. So how do you make soil more acidic or more basic? Well, To make it more acidic, you can add two things. You could add sulfur, otherwise known as gypsum. That's this. You could also add peat moss, which we've already talked about. Sulfur is slow to act, but it's more powerful, and it'll acidify the soil more just over a longer period of time. Peat moss is very, very quick, so if your soil is really basic and you need to lower it now, need to lower that pH now, you would use peat moss. The problem is it's fast acting but less powerful. To make soil more basic, really only one way, you would add garden lime. You would literally add limestone to the soil. And this would raise the soil pH. It would literally make the soil less acidic. Another soil additive are nutrients, and otherwise known as fertilizer. Nutrients are literally elements off the periodic table that plants absorb from the air, water, or soil that they need to live and carry on their processes. Nutrients are divided into two categories: macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients are the elements that plants need the most of in order to live. We're going to talk specifically about these macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Micronutrients are things that plants need, but you don't add them to soil because they only need very small amounts of them. And usually 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, there's enough of them going to be in the soil already. Stuff like iron or copper or zinc. You wouldn't add these to the soil. They would just naturally be there. Macronutrients and micronutrients are both elements that plants need to live and thrive. The difference is plants need more macronutrients than they do micronutrients. So those are the ones that you're going to add to soil in the form of fertilizer. And this is literally what fertilizer is. It is actually these elements. So let's go through what the nutrients are and what they do for plants. First macronutrients I want to talk about are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. These come from the air and water. Carbon from carbon dioxide in the air, hydrogen from the light reaction breaking down water, and oxygen from the air and the air. This is what plants use to make fats and proteins and carbohydrates and literally breathe. If you have too much of these things, there's no ill effect on the plant. However, not enough, just like us, when we run out of oxygen, the plant will die. Nitrogen is the first macronutrient that plants get from the soil. So we literally add it to plants via fertilizer. Nitrogen helps the vegetative body of plants, the roots, the stems, the leaves, anything that's green. If you add too much nitrogen, then you'll get a plant that's all leaves and all stems, but no flowers or fruit, because nitrogen doesn't help with that. Not enough causes plants' leaves to turn yellow and fall off and die. Now, if you think, certain plants would love nitrogen. Things like grasses, for instance, right? Or wheat, right? Anything that's mostly green that we don't need to flower, your lawn. That's where we would add nitrogen. However, you wouldn't want to add nitrogen to, let's say, a tomato plant, because we need the tomato plant to flower and produce tomatoes, fruit. We don't care about a 10-foot high tomato plant with no tomatoes on it. The next is phosphorus. Phosphorus is the second macronutrient that plants get from soil, and therefore it's the second macronutrient that's in fertilizers. Phosphorus helps the reproductive body of plants, the fruits and the flowers. It helps produce fruits and flowers. Too much of it, the plant will flower, but the fruit will die because there will be tons of flowers, tons of fruit, and the plant won't be able to actually support and develop all that fruit. It's sort of like the Octomom scenario. When you have 15 babies inside of you, you can't really support all of them. Not enough, the plant won't flower and the plant won't produce fruit. So nitrogen is good for crops that are mostly green, grasses, whereas phosphorus is good for flowering crops. Stuff like lemons, limes, citrus, roses would want more phosphorus. Last is potassium. Another macronutrient found in soil, therefore another macronutrient that we add to plants in fertilizer. Macronutrients help the plants absorb and store water and nutrients. Too much potassium isn't a bad thing. It really has no bad effects on the plants. However, without enough phosphorus, plants will become sick, wilt, meaning they droop and lose all their water, and then they eventually die. The last couple macronutrients you need less of, but still they're very, very important. Calcium, again found in soil, and instead of adding this in fertilizers, a lot of people add this in the form of eggshells. They literally crumple up eggshells and put them in the soil. Calcium helps plant cells stick together, and it helps the fruits actually come out solid and not mushy. The problem is too much makes the soil too basic, and acid-loving plants or even neutral-loving plants will die. And the fruits of plants will begin to rot on the vine if there's not enough nutrient, if there's not enough calcium. So you do need that right balance of calcium in the soil. Every box of fertilizer has 3 numbers that stand for the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in soil. Nitrogen, remember, vegetative body, stems and leaves. Phosphorus, flowers. Potassium, ability of plant to move water. And the higher these numbers, the more of those respective nutrients. Sometimes you'll get good fertilizer that has the right proper balance of these nutrients. But sometimes you'll get fertilizer that has really crappy balances. So let's take a look. Bloom Booster, right? Bloom Booster is 10, 52, 10. 10 parts nitrogen, 52 parts phosphorus, 10 parts potassium. Well, it's mostly this middle number, phosphorus, which is good for flowers, blooms. So that's a good fertilizer. Lawn Food. Mostly the highest number is 32, which is the first number, nitrogen. Great. Lawn's green. Nitrogen helps with a green vegetative body. But take a look at this lawn fertilizer. 18-24-6. Its high number is actually phosphorus. That means that this would be great if you want your lawn to flower, which you obviously don't want. So even though this fertilizer is cheap, it's not doing what it's claiming it's doing for the plants. It's just this fertilizer would be marketed to people that don't actually look at these numbers. They just look at the pictures on the boxes to pick out their fertilizers. Last, micronutrients. Micronutrients are 12 elements that plants only need in small amounts. You don't have to worry about what those 12 elements are, but it's useful to know that these micronutrients, iron, molybdenum, copper, zinc, these micronutrients are actually used to help the plants photosynthesize and metabolize food. Without these micronutrients, the plants would die, just like without the macronutrients, but they need such small amounts of them that they're usually just there in the soil anyway. In nature, there is no fertilizer, so the way nutrients get into the soil is plant death and decay. Whatever nutrients a tree, let's say, takes out of the soil by making leaves, it puts back into that soil as a result of that leaf falling to the ground in the autumn and rotting away on the forest floor. The problem is, when we farm, we don't let plants rot in the field. We literally, in the case of wheat or hay, or many other plants, cut the entire plant down. And this is the reason why agriculture, farmers need to constantly add fertilizer to the soil, because this natural process of letting soil nutrients return to the soil that happens in nature, literally by result of needing to harvest and eat what you're growing, isn't allowed in farming. So that's it for this chapter. That's it for this section of the chapter. There are 4 layers of soil: surface litter, topsoil, subsoil, and bedrock. Surface litter, all the stuff that's rotting on top. Topsoil, most nutritive layer. Subsoil, and then bedrock, complete rock. You can add either peat moss or sulfur to make soil less acidic, or lime to make it more more acidic rather, or lime to make it more basic. And depending on what type of plants you have, you want your soil to be more acidic or basic. Fertilizer is macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is good for leaves and stems. Phosphorus is good for flowers. Potassium is good for helping plants stay healthy and move water throughout their body. That's the basics of what you can add to soil. In the next chapter, we're going to talk to you about what the difference is between organic methods of growth versus inorganic methods of growth.